Get out. Right now. You are not my daughter anymore. Those were the words my mother threw at me the night everything in my life collapsed. She stood by the fireplace with her arms crossed, her face set in a cold expression that made the whole room feel smaller. My father didn't raise his voice. He didn't ask a single question. He simply opened the front door and let the winter air rush in as if he hoped it might wash me out of their lives. I was 17, still wearing my grocery store apron, still clutching the pregnancy test that had changed everything. My hands were shaking so badly I could hardly breathe. My mother stepped closer, her voice sharp enough to cut through whatever courage I had left. Girls like you ruin families. Take your mistake and leave. There was no concern in her voice, no hesitation, no love. They didn't ask if I had anywhere to go. They didn't ask if I had eaten. They didn't ask if I was scared. The door closed behind me with a heavy finality that felt like the sound of my entire childhood ending. I thought that night was the lowest point of my life. I had no idea that 10 years later, those same people would come back, not to apologize, not to reconnect, but to sue me for the life I built without them. Before I continue, I want to thank you for staying with me through these heavy opening moments. Sharing something like this is never easy, and knowing someone is here means more than I can put into words. If any part of this beginning reminds you of something you've lived through, your support through a like or a subscribe truly helps me keep telling these stories. And if you ever want to share your own thoughts or experiences, the comments are always open. I read every message with real gratitude. My name is Mariana Colwood, and I learned at 17 how quickly a family can decide you are no longer theirs. I grew up in Cedar Valley, a small town in Washington where neighbors waved to each other, lawns were kept tidy, and people pretended every family was whole. Ours wasn't. My mother cared more about reputation than love. A perfect house, perfect daughters, perfect image. My father believed silence was the answer to everything, and when he shut down, the entire house froze with him. My older sister Naomi was the golden child, bright, social, effortlessly impressive. My parents adored her in a way that made me fade into the background. At 15, I started working at the grocery store on Maple Street. People thought I was saving for a car or for college. The truth was much simpler. Something inside me kept whispering that one day, I might need to stand on my own. I just never expected that day to arrive in the middle of senior year. When I saw the 2 pink lines on that test, fear washed over me, but so did something steady, like a quiet strength forming in my chest. I thought my parents would be angry, but I believed they might soften. I believed they would still see me as their daughter. Instead, I found myself standing outside in the freezing cold, clutching a duffel bag and holding my stomach with both hands, as if I could protect the small life inside me. My father closed the door without looking back. I walked because I had no choice. I survived because someone needed me to. That night, I made a promise to the tiny heartbeat growing inside me. I will never let you feel the way they made me feel. That promise became the foundation of the life I would build. And I didn't know it then, but a decade later, that life would be the very thing my parents tried to take from me in court. I did not sleep much during the weeks after I was kicked out. Some nights I stayed in the back room of the grocery store where I worked, pretending I was reorganizing inventory so the manager wouldn't ask questions. Other nights, I slept on a worn-out couch in the apartment of a girl from school named Tessa, whose kindness surprised me because we were never close. She gave me blankets, handed me warm tea, and never once asked for anything in return. But even with her help, the fear never left me. I was 17, pregnant, and floating between places that were never meant to be home. During the day, I tried to keep going as if everything was normal. I went to school. I stocked shelves. I ate whatever cheap food I could afford. People began to whisper. Some classmates looked at me with pity, others with judgment. Teachers acted like they didn't see the dark circles under my eyes. And every time my phone buzzed, I hoped it was my parents, even though I knew better. It never was. I learned quickly that survival wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a movie montage. It was slow, exhausting, a constant negotiation with humiliation. I visited shelters, but most were full. I stood in line for assistance forms, but everything required parental signatures I no longer had. And every night, I lay awake wondering how I was supposed to become a mother when no one had ever been one to me. But then, something shifted. At 11 weeks pregnant, I heard the heartbeat. It was in a small clinic downtown. The room smelled like disinfectant, and the walls were a sterile pale green. But when the nurse placed the Doppler on my stomach, and that quick, fluttering sound filled the room, everything inside me broke open. It was faint, it was tiny, but it was real. A life depending on me, trusting me, choosing me, even when my own parents didn't. I cried so quietly the nurse had to kneel beside me to check if I was all right. I told her yes, even though the tears wouldn't stop. I wasn't crying from fear anymore. I was crying from something that felt dangerously close to hope. From that day on, I wasn't just surviving, I was preparing. I applied for every job I could find that didn't require parental approval. I started saving every tip, every dollar, every bit of loose change. I took on cleaning shifts at the local diner at dawn, went to school, stocked shelves at night, and did homework in the 15-minute breaks between shifts. Tessa's couch became my unofficial home, though I never let myself stay more than a few nights in a row because I didn't want to be a burden. Some mornings, I stood in front of the mirror in the grocery store bathroom, staring at my reflection. My face looked older, not in a bad way, but in the way people look when life forces them to grow up before they're ready. My eyes held something new, a quiet fire, a kind of strength my parents always claimed I didn't have. One afternoon, somewhere between exhaustion and determination, I made a decision. I dropped out of school. The guidance counselor barely blinked. People in towns like Cedar Valley rarely expect girls like me to make it to graduation anyway. I wasn't proud, but I didn't have the luxury of pride anymore. I needed to survive. I needed to give this child a chance at a life that didn't resemble mine. By the time I was 8 months pregnant, I had enough money saved for a studio apartment. Small, ugly, drafty, with a leaking faucet and peeling paint, but it was mine. And the first night I slept there, lying on a cheap mattress on the floor, I placed my hands over my stomach and whispered to my baby that we finally had a home. I was still a teenager, still alone, still scared. But for the first time since my parents closed that door, I felt a sense of direction, a sense of forward. I didn't know that life was about to get even harder. And I didn't know that in 10 years, the people who abandoned me would come back and try to take everything I built with these hands that once shook in the cold. But even then, something inside me whispered that I was meant for more than the place that broke me. I still remember the day everything finally erupted. The day years of quiet humiliation turned into one moment that split my life clean in half. It was a Saturday in early June, warm enough that the air smelled like cut grass and barbecue smoke drifting through the neighborhood. Tessa had convinced me to go with her to the Cedar Valley Senior Recognition Cookout, a yearly event the whole town attended. I didn't want to go. I was 9 months pregnant, exhausted, scared, and constantly aware of how people stared at me. But I didn't want to disappoint her. She had done so much for me already. The cookout was held at the town park, the one with the old wooden stage and picnic tables painted in red and white. Kids ran in circles, older folks chatted under the shade, and the school band played off-key near the gazebo. It should have been peaceful, even pleasant, but the moment I stepped onto the grass, I felt the weight of every set of eyes in the area turning toward me. Then, I saw them, my parents, standing beside Naomi like they were the picture-perfect family, dressed neatly, smiling politely at neighbors. My mother's hair curled perfectly, my father's shirt tucked in sharply, Naomi wearing her graduation sash like a queen on display. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. My baby kicked from the sudden tension. Tessa whispered that we could leave, but I shook my head. I didn't want to run anymore. I didn't want my parents thinking I was ashamed of surviving. Then, Naomi spotted me. Her smile froze, twisted slowly into something sharp. She leaned toward my mother, whispering something that made both of them glance my way with an expression so cold it made my skin burn. I tried to ignore it. Tessa and I found a seat near the back, and for a moment, I convinced myself I could get through the afternoon unnoticed. But Cedar Valley was small. No one stays invisible for long. Especially not girls like me. When the principal stepped up to the microphone to congratulate the graduating seniors, Naomi insisted on being the one to pass out the special recognition certificates. It was a tradition, usually reserved for a student leader. Naomi took the stage like she owned it, her voice bright, loud, dripping with confidence. Then, halfway through the announcements, she paused, scanned the crowd, and smiled. A dangerous smile. She said, loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Before we continue, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge someone extremely brave in our community. Someone who taught me what not to become," the crowd murmured. Tessa stiffened beside me. I felt every muscle in my body lock. Naomi raised her voice. "My sister Mariana is here today. She didn't graduate, but she did manage to give our family a little surprise this year." People started turning. Let's give her a round of applause for proving that some people really can't handle responsibility. It hit me like a punch. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Not loud, not cruel, not yet, but enough. Enough to cut. Enough to make my chest tighten so painfully I couldn't breathe for a second. My mother stood straight, arms crossed, staring at me like I was a stain she couldn't scrub out. My father didn't react. He just looked away, like he always had. Naomi wasn't finished. She stepped off the stage, carried a small wrapped box, and walked right toward me with that same poisonous smile. "I brought you a gift," she said loudly. She held out the box. I didn't reach for it. She opened it herself. Inside was a pack of diapers. She lifted it up high so the crowd could see. "There you go. Since you won't need a diploma, maybe this will help instead." People laughed. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to shatter the last fragile piece of pride I had been clinging to. My vision blurred. My throat tightened. My baby kicked again as if reacting to my heartbeat pounding too fast. Tessa whispered, "Let's go. Please." This time, I didn't argue. I stood up slowly. My hands shook. I didn't say a word. Not to Naomi. Not to the crowd. Not to the parents who had thrown me out. I turned and walked away, feeling dozens of eyes burning into my back. My mother called after me, just once, loudly enough for people near her to hear. That girl never knew how to take responsibility. I didn't turn around. I didn't cry yet. Not in front of them. I walked out of the park with my head held higher than I felt. Something inside me hurt so deeply I couldn't breathe. But something else, something sharper, something that felt like steel, began to form in its place. I didn't know it yet, but that day, the day they humiliated me in front of the whole town, was the day I stopped being theirs, and the day I started becoming someone they could never break again. After that day in the park, something inside me shifted for good. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't anger boiling over. It was quieter than that, colder, sharper. A kind of clarity that felt almost like waking up after years of sleep. I realized then that I didn't just need to survive anymore. I needed to build something. Something solid. Something no one could take from me. The first step was giving birth. I went into labor alone, in my tiny studio apartment with peeling paint and a leaky faucet. I called Tessa, who rushed over and held my hand through contractions until the ambulance arrived. By the time we made it to the hospital, I was shaking so hard from fear and exhaustion that the nurse had to help me breathe through each wave of pain. But when my son arrived, tiny and red and angry at the world, everything else disappeared. I named him Julian. For the first time in my life, I felt chosen, needed, loved without conditions. The nurses asked if my family was coming. I shook my head. They didn't ask again. I brought Julian home to that little apartment and promised myself that no matter how hard things got, I would give him a life different from the one I had. I worked every job I could find. The grocery store at night, cleaning shifts at dawn, babysitting on weekends, delivering takeout when Julian slept in the stroller. It was brutal, but it was ours. One night, during a late shift, I overheard two customers talking about a new community college scholarship program for single parents. It felt impossible, unrealistic, out of reach. But something in me stirred and whispered, "Why not try?" I applied. I got in. And for the first time since being thrown out of my parents' house, I felt the ground under me start to steady. I studied during Julian's naps. I took online classes while he played with plastic blocks beside my feet. Every test I passed felt like reclaiming a piece of the girl my parents insisted I would never become. 2 years later, I graduated with honors. The day I held that diploma in my hands, I cried in a way I hadn't let myself cry since the cookout humiliation. But these tears were different. They tasted like relief, like pride, like proof, and life kept opening in small, steady ways. A professor helped me land an internship at a logistics company. I worked hard, showed up early, stayed late. They hired me full-time. Within a few years, I climbed from assistant to operations coordinator, then to project manager. My salary rose. My apartment improved. I bought a reliable car. I enrolled Julian in a good school. And eventually, I opened my own small business, a logistics consulting firm that grew faster than I ever dreamed it would. Contracts came in. Money stabilized. My name, once whispered around Cedar Valley as a cautionary tale, was now spoken in conference calls and networking events as someone to watch, someone who built something from nothing. But the real turning point came the day I visited the county office to finalize paperwork for my company. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, slid a folder toward me. "You're the sole owner of everything listed here," she said. "Full legal and financial rights." I signed my name. In that moment, I realized something almost frightening in its power. Everything I had built, every dollar, every contract, every credential is tied solely to me. Not my parents, not my sister, not anyone from the family that once tossed me into the cold. I owned it all. And for the first time in my life, I felt untouchable. But life is rarely simple, especially not when people who once underestimated you start to realize you've become something they can't control. I didn't know it yet, but my parents had been watching from afar, whispering, asking around, stirring up old contacts, trying to figure out how the daughter they abandoned turned herself into someone they could no longer ignore. And the more successful I became, the more desperate they grew. The lawsuit was coming. I just didn't know it yet. The day everything came crashing back was a Thursday afternoon. I had just wrapped up a meeting with a new client, feeling proud, steady, and strangely peaceful. Julian was 10 by then, bright and curious, his backpack decorated with space stickers. He was waiting for me in the lobby with his tablet when the elevator doors opened, but standing beside him were my parents. The sight of them hit me like a fist to the chest. My mother in her pressed blazer, my father with that same silent, unreadable face. Julian looked confused but unbothered, the way kids do when strangers smile too kindly at them, and that alone infuriated me. They didn't deserve even a second of his innocence. My mother spoke first. "Hello, Mariana." Her voice was too soft, too calm, a tone she had never used with me before. It made my skin crawl. My father added, "We'd like to talk. Just a moment." That was when I knew something was wrong, deeply wrong. These people didn't come to talk, they came to take. I asked Julian to wait inside my office. He squeezed my hand, then trotted off. I closed the door behind him before facing the two people who had made my life a battlefield. "What do you want?" I asked. My mother's smile tightened. "We heard your business is doing well." "Very well. We're glad. Truly." The lie was so thin I could see the shape of the truth behind it. My father stepped in. "We believe, legally speaking, that we have certain rights regarding—" His pause was dramatic. "Practiced. Your success." I stared at him. For a second, I genuinely thought I misheard. "Rights? To what?" My mother clasped her hands together like she was praying. "We invested years raising you, providing for you. That entitles us to a portion of what you've built." And there it was, the truth, bare, ugly, absurd. I felt something inside me go perfectly still. Raising me, providing for me. They had kicked me out at 17 with a pregnancy test in my apron pocket and no coat in winter. My mother continued talking, but her voice became distant, like background noise. Things like family obligations, shared foundation, parental contribution. My father nodded along, his face stiff like stone, and I realized, in that moment, they actually believed it. They genuinely believed that abandoning me, humiliating me, and pretending I didn't exist somehow counted as an investment. When my father handed me a manila folder, I didn't take it. So he dropped it onto the lobby bench. The papers inside spilled slightly. I could see the bold letters on the first page. Intent to seek financial compensation. My mother leaned closer. "We'd prefer to resolve this privately," she said. "But we're prepared to take legal action if necessary." I didn't shout. I didn't tremble. I didn't cry. I just felt a quiet strength rising from a place so deep I didn't even know I had it. I knelt down, picked up the folder, closed it neatly, and held it between us. Then I said the calmest sentence I had ever said to them in my life. "You walked away from me the night you threw me out. You don't get to walk back in now because you want something." My mother's face contorted. My father's jaw clenched. But before they could respond, Julian opened my office door a crack. "Mom? Are we going home?" And with his small voice, everything snapped into clarity. This boy, this life, this peace, none of it existed because of them. All of it existed in spite of them. I took Julian's hand and gently pulled him behind me. My voice didn't shake when I said, "Do not come near my child again. You have no claim on him. None." My mother inhaled sharply. "We are his grandparents." I stepped closer, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of either of them. "You are strangers to him," I said, "and that will never change." I walked toward the elevator, Julian's hand warm in mine. My parents followed a few steps, calling my name, insisting we talk, insisting I was being unreasonable. I didn't turn around. I didn't give them my tears. I didn't give them one more piece of myself. But when the elevator doors closed, I finally looked down at the folder in my hand. And as the elevator descended, I felt the weight of it settle on my shoulders. They were really going to sue me. My own parents were going to drag me into court. For money. For control. For something they never earned. And I realized something chilling. They underestimated me once. They were about to do it again. And this time, I was ready. I spent the next few weeks in a strange mix of disbelief and focus. The shock of being served legal documents by my own parents came in waves, but every time the fear rose, something stronger rose with it. A determination I didn't know I had at 17. A spine I didn't have in that park years ago. The strength I had grown into, slowly, painfully, without them. The lawsuit was real. They wanted a percentage of my company, claiming parental investment and moral entitlement. It was absurd, cruel, parasitic, and yet, it was happening. I hired a lawyer, a calm, sharp woman named Eleanor Reeves who read through the paperwork with a tightening jaw. When she finally looked up, her eyes were full of a quiet fury on my behalf. "Mariana," she said, "I'm going to be very honest. This is one of the most unethical claims I've ever seen, but we're going to win." For the first time since the confrontation in my lobby, I felt like I could breathe. Julian sensed the tension, even if he didn't fully understand it. One night, after dinner, he sat beside me on the couch and leaned his head on my shoulder. "Mom, you're not smiling as much lately." His voice was soft, hesitant. I wrapped my arm around him. "I'm okay, Jules, just dealing with grown-up problems." He nodded, but he kept his head on my shoulder. "You always fix things. You'll fix this too." And somehow, that simple sentence was enough to steady me again. During the lawsuit preparation, I worked during the day, spent evenings with Julian, and stayed up late gathering documents, timelines, and records of every year I struggled alone, medical bills, rent receipts, pay stubs from those endless jobs, enrollment forms, photos of our old apartment, everything that proved exactly who raised Julian, who provided for him, who fought for him, and who didn't. It changed me. Not just the lawsuit itself, but the process of revisiting the past I had worked so hard to leave behind. Every receipt, every signature, every dated piece of paper was a reminder of how far I had come, how much I had survived, how deeply I had carved a life out of nothing. Eleanor noticed it too. After one long meeting, she closed the folder and said, "You know, everything you've built speaks louder than anything they could say in court. You're not the girl they threw out anymore." I felt that line settle deep in my chest. I wasn't. I truly wasn't. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. I got promoted. The consulting firm I once built alone in a tiny apartment was now partnering with bigger companies. I hired staff. I moved into a new office. And for a moment, the lawsuit didn't feel like a burden, it felt like a test I was finally prepared to pass. One Friday evening, after picking Julian up from school, he asked if we could get ice cream. So we went. We sat at a small outdoor table, the sun warming our faces, his sneakers swinging above the ground as he talked about planets and school projects. I watched him and realized something huge. I wasn't scared anymore. Not of my parents, not of the lawsuit, not of the past, not of losing what I had built, because the truth was simple. Everything I had, I built alone. Every piece of my life came from nights I didn't sleep, years I didn't quit, and a promise I made to a baby when the world had turned its back on us. And somewhere between Julian's laughter and the soft hum of the evening traffic, I felt a new kind of peace. A warm, steady certainty. No matter what happened in court, we were going to be okay. Because I had already lived through the worst thing that could happen to a child. I had survived my own parents. And now, standing on the other side of all that pain, I could finally feel it. The past no longer owned me. I did. Fully. Completely. Quietly. Stronger than they ever imagined. The first day of the trial felt unreal. The courthouse in Bryan County had tall windows, pale stone floors, and rows of benches that echoed every faint sound. I walked in wearing a simple navy dress, my hair pulled back, my shoulders steady. Julian wasn't with me. I didn't want him anywhere near this. He stayed home with a neighbor he adored, spending the morning building a small solar system model for school. Before I left, he hugged me and said, "You've got this, Mom. You always do." And somehow, that was enough armor to walk through those doors. My parents were already seated at the plaintiff's table when I entered the courtroom. My mother's posture was stiff, chin raised, lips pressed into a line she probably believed looked dignified. My father sat beside her, avoiding my eyes the same way he had avoided every hard moment of my childhood. Naomi was sitting behind them, expression smug, as if she were here to collect a long-awaited victory. For a moment, the old ache flickered in my chest, the familiar sting of being unwanted, unseen, unloved. But then, it passed. I wasn't the girl they threw out anymore. And today, they were about to learn exactly who I had become. The judge, a woman in her 60s with clear eyes and a brisk tone, began the proceedings. My parents' lawyer spoke first, painting a picture of a poor, misunderstood couple who had invested years of care and financial support into a daughter who abandoned them in her rise to success. He used words like contribution, entitlement, familial obligation. With every sentence, I felt the courtroom drift further from truth into some kind of twisted fiction my parents had been rehearsing for years. Then, it was Eleanor's turn. She stood slowly, calmly, like she had been waiting for this moment. "Your Honor," she said, "the foundation of their claim relies on the assumption that my client was raised in a stable, supportive household, but the evidence will show the opposite, completely the opposite." And then she began laying it all out. The eviction-like moment, when I was 17, the medical records from giving birth alone, the rent receipts from the studio apartment, the pay stubs from 3 jobs at once, the scholarship paperwork for single parents, the documented years of zero contact, the photographs of Julian's birthdays where no grandparents ever showed up. The proof that every dollar, every hour, every milestone came from me alone. My parents' faces went stiff. Naomi's smugness evaporated. Then Eleanor presented something I had forgotten even existed. The police record. The one from the night I was kicked out. A neighbor had filed a wellness concern after hearing yelling and seeing me leave the house late at night in the cold. The officer who checked on me documented the situation. No coat, no money. Pregnant minor removed from residence. Parents refused to speak. When the judge read the report, something in the courtroom shifted. Even Naomi looked down. My mother whispered, "That's not accurate." My father muttered, "This is a misunderstanding." But it was too late. Their own past had risen from the ashes. Eleanor finished with one final statement that struck the room silent. "Your Honor, the people sitting across from us did not invest in Mariana. They abandoned her. Everything she has built, she built despite them, not because of them. And the law does not reward abandonment." The judge took her time reviewing the documents. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. Julian's voice echoed in my mind. "You always fix things, Mom." Finally, the judge looked up. "The court finds no legal basis for the plaintiff's claim. All demands are denied." My mother gasped. My father sank back in his chair. Naomi covered her mouth. But the judge wasn't finished. "And given the evidence of past neglect, the court strongly advises the plaintiffs to cease further contact with the defendant and her child." It was over. Completely over. I didn't look at my parents as I gathered my papers. I didn't smile or gloat or celebrate. I just breathed, slow and deep, the way people breathe when they finally step out of a storm they've been walking through for years. Outside the courthouse, sunlight spilled across the steps, warm and steady. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. For the first time since I was 17, the world felt safe. I picked Julian up that afternoon. He ran to me, holding his solar system project, talking a mile a minute about how he made Saturn's rings out of cardboard. I listened, smiling, feeling lighter than I had in a decade. That night, after he fell asleep, I sat beside his bed and whispered the same promise I had made when he was still inside me. "You will never feel what they made me feel." And then, quietly, I added something new. "And neither will I." Because the truth was simple now. I wasn't broken. I wasn't abandoned. I wasn't theirs to define. I was someone who had rebuilt her life from dust and refused to let the past steal even one more piece of it. My parents tried to take my future, but in the end, all they did was remind me of my strength. And walking away from them for the second time in my life didn't hurt at all. It felt like freedom.